Hello and welcome to my second video looking at liberalism. Today we're going to look at liberalism and human nature. Now essentially liberalism has a very optimistic view of human nature. It talks about rationalism, it talks about individualism, but essentially they think people are good and are going to be successful and solve problems, and everything's going to get better. So they look forward to the future, liberals, in a really positive way. And there are some conflicts actually within liberalism when it comes to some of the stuff, because there's talk about consensus and rationalism, but obviously the key of liberalism is also individualism, which doesn't necessarily automatically fit with consensus and people getting on. Right. So start off with the optimism, and this is one of the bits I really like about the concept of liberalism. It's one of the bits that they're kind of is attractive about it, is this idea that they look at the prospects going forward, and they believe that the future will be better than the past. So an opposite of this would be, so for example, if you look at illiberal ideologies, and they will tend to kind of hark back to a golden age when everything was better, and talk about society declining. Whilst a liberal will talk about things are going to get better, things are going to improve. The future will be better than today. Will be better. Today is better than the past, because they believe in this idea of progress, and that essentially that people will overcome the difficulties and obstacles in front of them, and this will lead to greater human happiness. And ultimately, again, and some of you might argue this is possibly naive, but the ideology of liberalism talks about that ultimately that humanity will live in peace and harmony, with the great deal of self-awareness, but also with this kind of mutual understanding, which is born out of a kind of a rational understanding of others, through an understanding of yourself and what is best, and learning and all those kind of things. Now liberalism develops in kind of the 17th century through to the modern day, and in its early development it was kind of in facing a world in which the traditional teaching had been that mankind was really flawed, that it was kind of mankind was condemned because of its imperfection, kind of really old-fashioned kind of religious ideology on this. And the liberals said, no, we're not flawed, we are not condemned, we are not perfect, but we're going to get there, we're going to get better, we're going to get better. So it's a really optimistic view of the world and human nature, and very much a reaction to kind of predominant ideologies that had gone before in the medieval period. This idea of humans being flawed, imperfect, and generally bad. Whilst liberals don't think people are bad, they think people are good, and that's kind of the starting. So linked into that, and I already mentioned this idea of people being rational. The people make decisions based on reason. So people generally will act in a rational, reasoned way. The debate and discussion and questioning things are natural. That is the natural state of humanity, and that's what people do. So you will get discussion, you'll get conflict in that way, that people will debate and go, well, I think this is the best way of doing it. No, I think this is the best way of doing it. But through reason and argument, then you will gain some kind of consensus. And because humans are questioning the world around them, then through things like education and science, then things will progress, and people will overcome the problems that are facing them. And we can see this. And if you study history, then you'll look at stuff in the past and go, well, what they did, why didn't they understand that? Again, a good example would be something like medicine through time, and people would look at it and go, I know what they were doing back then. What was going on? Well, what a liberal would say is, and over time, is what people have done is they've solved those problems. They've understood through looking at things they found, germ theory or whatever else it is, in all kinds of different walks of life in human experience. that humanity is constantly solving those challenges and problems. And we see that very much in the modern day, and we can see it tracing it back through history. And the liberals go, right, we are rational, we understand the world, we get better and better understanding of the world, we solve more and more of the problems, life gets better. One of the key aspects is this idea of individualism, and that you make your own path, make your own way in the world. Now, again, this is a reaction to kind of ideas that predate liberalism in the old medieval world, which said that essentially you're not in control. God or some greater being is in control, and everything that happens to you is predetermined. And liberals said, no, life is not predetermined. We have free will. We make our own destiny. And we have an ability to plan and change our futures. And now an idea of this was the idea of self-help, the idea of self-improvement. And this is really big in the 19th century. Was the idea that the end point in your life, where you ended up in life, wasn't determined by where you were born into society. So in earlier life, you'd had things like feudal systems and really kind of strict social hierarchy. And what the thinkers in the 19th century were saying, well, no, actually, even if you're born into a poor background, you don't have great prospects, well, you can, through self-help, you can improve yourself, you can make yourself a better person and therefore become a more successful person. So people will, in liberal ideology, will talk about people kind of making things for themselves, like that self-made person that you'll still see talked about in modern ideology, that someone can take themselves from somewhere, and a lot of these ideas filter into places like America with the idea of the American dream, where you can improve yourself. And self-help through things like education were a big part of this in the 19th century thinking behind liberalism. So make yourself better, make your own way, and you have free will. Now, one of the other sides of individualism is that people, in essence, are going to prioritize themselves. So everyone's starting point, according to liberal ideology, is self-interest. That they are worried about themselves, and this is referred to as egotistical individualism. And so people are going to naturally try and advance their own interests and happiness. So essentially, you look after number one first. Now, that seems like it's not going to create a great society, and we will look at liberalism and society in a future video. But the other side of the initial thinking in terms of human nature on liberalism is that although ultimately your primary concern is your own interest and your own happiness, the rationality will lead you to not doing this in a way that will lead you into conflict or dismiss the feelings of others. So you will be looking after yourself, but you will also be mindful of how your actions and your behavior impact on others, and you will therefore act in a way that will improve the greater good. And also the doing things that help you will probably also be things that would help other people. And so this will lead to a degree of consensus, and we start to get, we'll see this more when we look at the idea of the liberal state. So reasoned discussion, you're looking after number one, but you're going to get some form of consensus, because what's good for one person is likely to be good for more than one. Now, it's not always the thought in terms of all liberal thinkers on this. So a lot of the stuff in the 19th century, they started to look at the growth of the state, the growth of the franchise in terms of who could vote and things like that. And there was some concern in some liberal thinkers on this. Now, some of what I'm terming here as a liberal thinker, a lot of people wouldn't think of as being particularly liberal and based on some of their attitudes. But one of these ideas came out of individualism, was this idea of survival of the fittest. And this idea of social Darwinism. Now, this stuff is then used in the 20th century by groups like the Nazis, which are a very, very long way away from liberal. But what it does show us in these ideas, when the discussions are happening on this in liberalism in the 19th century, is there is a conflict. There is a difficulty at the heart of liberalism, where this idea with individualism. Can we have individualism and consensus, or will liberalism lead to conflict? So do we look to one person looking after themselves and ignoring the rest of society, or do we end up with people starting from a position of individualism, but through rationality reaching consensus and people looking after each other? Now, Herbert Spencer, he actually ultimately argues that what will happen is that will be this stronger group will emerge, and they will then all be able to work with consensus and enjoy individual freedom. He was worried about the freedom of some individuals being destroyed by the inability to look after themselves by others. And it is, again, at the heart of a lot of discussion stuff that we see going forward with liberalism. And when we look at the different strands of liberalism, then this starts to take things off in different directions as we go forward. So a kind of modern liberal ideology on individualism and consensus, and ultimately things like the state, is going to be very different from a neoliberalism view on it. And this goes back to their ideas on human nature. So they generally believe in improvement, but it's whether that idea of improvement is going to be on an individual basis or whether it's going to be something that is going to help everybody else. Right, so thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and all of that kind of exciting stuff. The next video, we'll look at liberalism in society, and we'll come back to some more of this kind of conflicting stuff. Now, ultimately, the story on human nature is a positive one. It's based on individualism. There's a belief in the rationality of humanity. So the human nature one is generally very positive. We'll then look at how this then transfers into a society and into a state. And we'll start exploring some of the key thinkers in a bit more detail. Right, thank you very much for watching.